Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about the Shiradi caster. And so this is a build that, I played years ago, back in like 2012, 2013, when they were first became fashionable after when Epic Destinies first came out. And then, Shiradi got a nerf, and then nobody wanted to play Shiradi Magic Missile spammers anymore. I'm talking about the Magic Missile spammer build. And I had fun with it for a few months back then, but it got kind of boring, honestly, to sling magic missiles all the time. So, I actually stopped playing the build. Even though I still had it, I just didn't play it very much just because I got bored. But back then, it was very powerful. Very, very powerful. Today, it's probably not quite as powerful. But I had heard after the Epic Destiny changes that Shiradi casters were kind of cool again. So I was like, okay, let's give it a try. I looked in the sorc forums. I didn't see any builds posted for it. So I just, I'm just kind of winging it based on what I know of Shiradi Magic Missile spammers from the past, and then trying to adapt that to DDO 2022. And so I'm going to be posting this on my YouTube channel, and I hope that others who maybe have played it maybe can offer some tips, because like I said, there's nothing posted in the forums about it, not specific information anyways. And so I'm just doing my best. I'm no pro at the new Epic Destiny system. I'm just, still trying to learn it and figure it all out. So, I'm sure there's probably a more optimal way to do things, but I'm going to show you what I have set up. And then for people who are interested in doing a build like this, it might give you like a foundation to work from, or if you don't understand what a Shiradi Magic Missile spammer is, I'm going to explain the gist of that too. So this is an Epic Destiny based build, so it's not something you're going to want to try to play, if like you're just doing a 1 to 20 life. It's totally Epic Destiny dependent, okay? And, up until I got to Epics, I was just playing as a fire sorc. Once I got into Epics, I focused on the Shiradi Champion tree. And in Shiradi Champion, you can get a lot of procs, a lot of different random effects, from every time you hit with like a ranged weapon or a spell, for example. And there is maybe some synergy, if you will, when it comes to like Magic Missile and Chain Missile, because with Magic Missile, you're throwing 5 missiles at a time. Chain Missile, you're throwing 10 missiles at a time. And guess what? Every one of those missiles has a separate chance to proc all of those different Shiradi things. So it's like there are things that can like proc lots of extra damage, a blinding effect, a stunning effect, maybe some stat damage. I can't remember if that's in there. It used to be in the old, but I'm not sure if it's still here. Anyways, there's all kinds of different effects that can proc when you hit, and it's a separate hit with every one of those missiles. So you can generate tons and tons of Shiradi procs and do lots of damage and have lots of other cool effects too. Crowd control effects, again, like blinding and stunning, for example. And, Magic Missile and Chain Missile are on such a short cooldown that you could just sit there and spam them over and over and over. And it's like 5 missiles, 10, 5, 10, 5, 10, 5, 10. And I also pepper in Meteor Swarm because that's a pretty high DPS spell. So really my spell rotation is literally just Magic Missile, Chain Missile, and Meteor Swarm. Literally just those 3. Back in the day, it was popular to include Force Missile. You could do that. If you're doing a wizard version of this, you'd be a little bit slower of a caster, a little bit longer cooldowns. You might want to include that too. On the sorc, I certainly don't need to. Literally just those 3 spells. They have built-in crowd control because of all the Shiradi procs. I also have some additional crowd control because there's a freezing effect from Legendary Crown of Snow, and there's also a slowing effect. I'm using a Legendary Salt, which has a slowing effect. So I have lots of crowd control built into all those missiles from all of those sources. I was using the Royalties Frigid Response sword out of Dryad the Demigod to have 2 different freezing effects, but I decided to go with the Salt instead. I also have Greater Color Spray from Fey Dark Illusionist and Fey Lights from Shiradi, so that's like a double cone, lots of different crowd control effects that I can use for crowd control as well. And I have, I have lots of other spells, but that's basically mainly what I use. I suppose you could build it a little bit differently, put a little bit more emphasis on on like a enchantment focus, and then you could maybe instead of Meteor Swarm, you could take like Mass Hold Monster, might be nice. That would be one advantage of playing this as a wizard instead of a sorcerer, is you'd have more 9th level spells to choose from, because this configuration is 18 sorc or wizard, and then 2 favored soul, and I'll explain in a minute why favored soul is important. So when you're only 18 sorc, you only get 1 9th level spell. But like I said, if you wanted to, Mass Hold Monster could be a good alternative if you put a little bit more emphasis than I did on my DCs. My DCs, they're not terrible, but they're not very good. 85 on the Meteor Swarm, 84 on Sunburst. Of course, that's outside of Reaper and unbuffed and unpotted, but a little bit more work I think could get them to a serviceable place. I just haven't made that emphasis in my build. Yeah, the wizard can get a magic missile SLA, but it's on such a long cooldown that I just don't think it's worth including in the rotation, but you can if you want to. Okay, so what else can be said about this? So lots of missiles. The idea that part of the gist of what's going on here is you're throwing so many missiles, and there's just like tons of procs off of those missiles. Again, it's not just the one spell that procs, it's every single missile of that spell. 5 missiles with magic missile, 10 missiles with chain missiles, and every single one of those missiles has a separate chance to proc all of those effects. So that's part of it. What about Favorite Soul? What's that all about? So 2 levels of Favorite Soul to get Scourge and Just Reward. I've also got some Force Crit chance here. That's cool. I just had an extra point, so I put +1 to all saves, but this has nothing to do with it. But the Force Crit chance is nice. Okay, Scourge says whenever you cast a Fire, Force, Light, or Physical damage spell, you gain +3 to your Fire, Force, Light, or Physical spell power for 6 seconds. It stacks up to 10 times. So it's some additional stacking spell power because you're constantly spamming those Force spells. So that's constantly, maxed out. So some extra spell power. But Just Reward is sort of the crux of things. But honestly, well, in any event, so the idea here is that when you critically hit with a Fire, Force, Light, or Physical damage spell, you gain 10 sacred temporary spell points. Okay? Well, if I'm throwing 15 missiles, like every 2 seconds, literally, and every one of them has like a 50% chance to crit, obviously I'm going to be critting a lot, right? I'm going to be critting like, probably on at least 7 of those missiles every couple of seconds. So I'm going to be generating lots of temporary spell points. So this is like an infinite spell point build. It's just you're constantly generating this like cloud of temporary spell points, and you're just casting from that. I mean, so you can go through like a whole quest and end up with a full mana bar practically without ever shrining and without ever having to pick up a lost soul. It's kind of nice. That's one of the features of the build, is that you just basically never run out of mana. I mean, as long as you can have enough mana to throw a magic missile, and my magic missile is literally 3 spell points, that's enough to start generating a cloud of temporary spell points. And with Echoes of Power, of course, I'm never going to run out of mana, because even if I really do run out, it's just I'm going to get some back right away. And to really emphasize how effective it is, I tried to solo R1 Caught in the Web a few weeks back. I wasn't successful, but I got, pretty deep into the first Loth fight. I did the first Loth beatdown, and then I was working on all the Bebelith souls, and Loth drains all your spell points with her laser beam eyes, right? Literally drains them all away. That wasn't a problem for me. That wasn't the problem at all. Because even when she drained all my spell points, as soon as Echoes of Power kicked in and I got 3 spell points to throw a magic missile, boom, I was immediately generating mana. It literally, I didn't have to drink any pots or anything, because you can generate so many temporary spell points as soon as you start casting Magic Missile. So literally having all my spell points drained away wasn't even a problem. So it's basically an infinite mana generator, which is pretty neat. And with that cloud of temporary spell points that you're building up, you can throw other spells too. The spell point cost of Meteor Swarm is covered, for example. Now I never pick up a Lost Soul, I never shrine, and I never even come close to running out of mana. So you can see I'm heavily invested in Feydark Illusionist. So this would be one feature of the Shiradi caster in 2022 that we didn't get to benefit from back in the olden days in 2012 and 2013, because Feydark Illusionist wasn't around then. But Feydark Illusionist has a lot of force spell power and force crit chance in addition to other goodies, so I'm actually invested to tier 5 Feydark Illusionist instead of the Fire Savant. Okay, so the Fire Savant, the only real thing I kind of would like to have out of here is the Awakened Elemental Weakness, but I don't really need it because, I've got fire spells and I've got force spells. How many mobs am I going to come across that are both immune to fire and force? Basically none. Well, as far as DCs go, like, all that stunning and blinding and stuff off of Shiradi, they're not DC based. Those are just, it's percent based. So, I can stun mobs and freeze mobs and slow mobs, slowing through the Salt Weapon, freezing through the Crown of Snow, stunning through Shiradi, blinding through Shiradi. None of that is save based. Okay? Now, Greater Color Spray is save based. Parts of it. And Phalites, let's see, is also. And even though I have just sort of mediocre DCs, they still, when I throw them back to back, they still definitely both, they make a nice difference. And again, I'll just show my DCs for something like, Meteor Swarm was unbuffed outside of Reaper 85. Sunburst unbuffed outside of Reaper 84. So they're not garbage DCs, but they're definitely far from being optimal, right? I'd want them to get those like a good 20 higher, which would be doable, but just not necessary for what I'm doing anyways. But you could focus on that if you wanted to. And like I said, if you want to take, Mass Hold Monster as your 9th level spell and focus on enchantment, that would be an option too. So in addition to lots of force spell power and force crit chance, here's force crit chance, force crit chance, force crit chance, and force spell power and universal spell power built into the cores. You got 4 points of charisma. I've got Greater Color Spray. I've got Free and Large, and this is pretty amazing. This is something we didn't benefit from, the old-timey Shiradi casters from years ago, is now our missiles are enlarged for free if you're deeply invested in the Feydark Illusionist, and that's pretty cool. So I'm shooting my magic missiles and force missiles really far. I also have permanent displacement, which is pretty nice, and then I've got some extra force spell power, universal spell power. I haven't tried the Ring of Shadow Blades. I did play around with Fan of Shadow Blades, didn't seem worth it. Then I tried Shadow Blade, I don't even use it. And then I was talking about respecking and trying Ring of Shadow Blade, so I can't speak to that. Just some spell points. You've got my back. It is a very loud build, I'll tell you that, because you've got my back, absorbs magic missiles. And when you absorb a magic missile, there's like a crash sound. Well, unfortunately, that effect, that sound that you hear when you absorb a magic missile, also goes into effect when you're for outgoing missiles. So if you're constantly throwing magic missile, chain missile, you're constantly getting like that crashing sound. So it's a very loud and obnoxious build right now. I have a feeling that's not working as intended. That shouldn't be proccing on outgoing, that effect where you see like the purple shield and you get like the white crashing effect, and it's really loud. It's probably not supposed to do that on outgoing missiles, just when it blocks an incoming missile. But in any event, that's the way it's working now, and it is very, very loud. Every time I group with people, they're saying something about it. I've turned down my own sound effects. It's sound effects, not combat sounds. that are going to affect the volume of that, just in case you're wondering. Now, the human tree, this has nothing to do with the build. I am working through human racials right now. That is the only reason I am human, and the 13 points that I have spent there are just because I have 13 points from tomes and past lives. So nothing there to do with the build. All right, in addition to being heavily invested into Shiradi, and I was pretty irritated that I did have to spend 6 points that I didn't want to spend in tier 5, so a little side rant here. This is one of the problems I have with the new Epic Destiny system, is that you got all these combo trees, like you got Shadow Dancer, can't decide whether it wants to be a rogue or you know, a caster tree. You got Shiradi Champion, which has never been able to decide whether it was a ranged or caster tree. I don't really like that, but if you want to do that, that's fine. Let's do it instead of this half-assed stuff that's going on right now. There's too much in these trees that only support one or the other playstyle. If you're going to make this a combo tree, let's have more of this stuff affect both playstyles, okay? There shouldn't be anything in Shiradi that's just like, oh, this is just for bow users, okay? Because there's going to be casters that want to be in this tree that don't give a crap about bow stuff. Vice versa, if you're a bow user in Shiradi, you're not going to give a crap about the caster stuff. So, you know, this should be like, you know, 6% double shot or 5% extra spell critical damage or whatever. Something that, you know. So I ended up having to spend 6 points in Shiradi that I wasn't really crazy about spending just to get up to tier 5. You know, and I know there's lots of illusion casters out there that are pretty irritated. They got to go all the way up to tier 5 Shadow Dancer just to get weird, you know? In any event, so my off destinies are Shadow Dancer and Exalted Angel. Originally, I went with Primal Avatar instead of Shadow Dancer, but I didn't like the fact that, like, and I went with Primal Avatar primarily for Cocoon and Mass Cocoon, but those were, one of them, the Mass Cocoon or something, was like one of the epic strikes. And all the epic strikes compete with each other for cooldown, which is another design I didn't like about the new system. So, you know, I have epic strikes in the other destinies, so I didn't want to have all these, you know, 3 different epic strikes that are all competing for cooldown. So I got rid of the Primal Avatar, and I tried Shadow Dancer, which I like. What originally drew me to this is that, you know, you've got Force and Universal Spell Power with each of the cores. You also got Evasion. So I've got, you know, Evasion with a unbuffed 78 reflex save. I get 12 more when I'm in Reaper mode, plus I'm not even buffed up right now. So I've got, like, you know, a 90-something reflex save when I'm doing Reapers with Evasion, which is pretty cool. Okay, and I got a lot of extra saves in here. Less threat. Reflex save. Minus 10% spell cooldown, immune to energy drain. I did experiment with this epic strike here, and is it here? This says when you activate your Shadow Dancer epic strike, you imbue your spell cast with evil energies for 10 seconds. Your sneak attack dice are now applied to your harmful spell casts. So that's kind of neat. Your spells deal 1d6 untyped damage, and you do get sneak attack dice right from the cores of Shadow Dancer. So even if you don't have sneak attack dice from other sources, they are built into the tree. Your spells deal 1d6 untyped damage per sneak attack dice you have, scaling with melee, ranged, or force spell power if it's higher. This may only trigger once per spell cast per monster. So multi-hit spells like Magic Missile will only have 1 additional damage value. So I played with this. It didn't seem that exciting, but somebody who is a better player than me could probably do some better experimenting and, you know, maybe build around that. I don't know. I dumped it. Again, it was just another epic strike to compete with my other epic strike. So that was another reason I was like, I don't want to have a third epic strike. And then just have them all compete with cooldown of the others. So I gave that up. Again, it didn't seem that exciting, but, you know, somebody who was a better build mechanic than me might be able to do something with that to make it more exciting for spellcast. In any event, that's the gist of what Shadow Dancer is about. And then I'm over here in Exalted Angel, primarily because I get 2 healing spells, a single target healing pillar here, and that's an epic strike. And then over here, I've got the Mass Cure Moderate Wounds SLA. So I actually have 4 healing spells, which is pretty nice. I got Mass Cure Moderate Wounds. I got Healing Pillar. I'm 2 levels of Favorite Soul, so I have Cure Light Wounds. And then in Shiradi, I have Healing Spring. And that's a charge-based mass healing spell. It's like a Mass Vigor. And I have 8 charges. So I throw that as like a last resort heal. And I've never run out of charges yet. You know, I focus on using the other ones first. So 4 healing spells is pretty nice on a sorc. You're not going to do any raid healing probably, but you could definitely do a lot of maintenance healing, you know, or help out with raid healing if needed. Or if you're in a group that just doesn't need a lot of healing, you're good to go. But I also got wings here too. So I got evasion out of Shadow Dancer. I got wings out of Exalted Angel. I got 4 heals. I've got infinite mana. I've got pretty good DPS. I wouldn't say, you know, it's probably not top DPS. I do not build DPS builds, so I can't really compare it to like how this compares to top DPS. But I would definitely, you know, my best guess is that like it's good DPS, but it's not like great DPS. That's my best guess. It's easy to play because you're really just spamming 3 spells the whole time: Magic Missile, Chain Missile, and Meteor Swarm. You're going to pepper in, you know, your Greater Color Spray and your Fey Lights for some additional crowd control if you want. You know, you're walking into a room, I'll hit both of those right away. Boom. And so what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to post this video and the gist of the build in the sorc forum and maybe try to get some feedback and see what other people think about it, since there's nothing about, you know, Shiradi Magic Missile spammers posted in the sorc forums right now. I can't think of any other components to the build. Let me see. Feat wise, I don't think there's really anything special to mention. Epic Spell Power Force, of course. I went with Scion of Feywild. +4 the DCs of enchantment and illusion spells, so that's going to affect my Fey Lights and Greater Color Spray. It's got Sonic and Force Spell Power, Sonic and Force Spell Critical Damage, Emboldened Spell helps my DCs. Do I have that on? Yes. I have all the mental toughnesses for the extra crit chance. You know, but my crit chance for Force is just 48. So I feel like, you know, that could probably go up quite a bit. But I usually don't build like, you know, DPS spellcasters these days. You know, I usually stick with my niche little caster tank thing going on. I did configure a sentient weapon for it. Again, I'm not used to building sentient weapons for casters, but I went with 5-piece Dragon Soul. The other 3 pieces are on my artifact, so I have -10% spell cooldown and +5% spell critical damage. So 5-piece Dragon Soul, 4-piece Coalesce Magic, and 4-piece Lunar Magic. But, you know, like if you wanted to go more DC focused, you know, you could definitely go, you know, with lots of other, you know, obviously Eye of the Beholder, but there are newer sets that give DCs as well. So there's lots of DCs available from Filigrees. The threat reduction of Fate Singer and Shadow Dancer stack. Nice. I'm not even optimally geared. You know, I'm really just using gear that I had. Sigil of Regal Port for Charisma, Quality Spell Focus Mastery. Icon of Bitter Wind is kind of dumb, but I just didn't have any, you know. I'm just knocking out a past life, just experimenting with the build. It's just something I had. Mysterious Cloak is not very exciting either. Again, it's just something I had to put in the cloak slot. Legendary Dire Bearer Belt. I do have the 4-piece winter set for the 10% stacking hit points. That's really what that was about. The Legendary Shattered Onyx. That's Profane Spell Focus 2, Insightful Charisma, and Gloryborn Glove, Sacred Spell Focus 2. Deep Snow Boots, big fan of having freedom of movement. Obviously, a big source of insightful and quality con as well. Part of the winter set. Legendary Omniscience is just something I had, but it is a nice source of repost, which is basically the same thing as parrying and resistance and fortification, so it worked. It's also my source of Constitution. I have that slotted up with Diamond of Constitution 12. I think that's my source of con. And then I'm using 3-piece Legendary Esoteric Initiate from Sharn. And finally, the Crown of Snow. It's the 4th winter piece. And then my weapons are Legendary Salt for the slowing effect. Like I said, I was using the Bitter Edge for the Royalty's Frigid Response to have a secondary freezing effect. But after playing with both the Salt and the Bitter Edge, I decided to go with the Salt instead. When I'm fighting a raid boss or something, I switch to Legendary Vacuum for the vulnerability. Where's my vacuum? There it is right there. And then my main weapon is the Legendary Fusible Scepter of Impulse for big impulse and insightful impulse and kinetic lore. Evocation focus. I think that's the gist of it.